The ledger wouldn't balance, and Lucy Winslow was beginning to suspect her brother's arithmetic was more optimistic than accurate. She pressed her fingers against her temples, squinting at the columns of numbers that seemed to multiply rather than resolve themselves. The afternoon light filtered through the bow window of Winslow & Son books, catching dust motes that drifted between towers of leather-bound volumes. Somewhere in the back room, the shopcat, an orange beast named Ptolemy, knocked over what sounded like an entire shelf of penny dreadfuls. Thomas is going to return from paternity leave to find his inventory catalogued by a madwoman and organized by a cat, Lucy muttered, abandoning the ledger in favor of rescuing whatever literary casualties Ptolemy had claimed. She'd made it halfway across the shop when shouting erupted from the street outside. Lucy paused, one hand on a stack of Gothic novels that threatened to avalanche. The Strand was always noisy, street vendors hawking everything from hot pies to stolen watches, carriages clattering over cobblestones, the occasional religious zealot predicting doom. But this was different, angrier. "Swear it was him. Had the same coat, same build." "You're certain? Because if we grab the wrong man again, Hewitt will have our hides." Lucy moved to the window, pressing close enough to the glass that her breath fogged it. 3 men stood in a loose semicircle around a fourth figure, a man in rough workman's clothes who had his back pressed against the shuttered front of the tobacconist next door. Even from this distance, she could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands were raised in a placating gesture. Something in her chest tightened. She recognized that posture. The physical language of someone trying to talk their way out of violence they didn't deserve. "I don't know what you're talking about," the cornered man said, his voice carrying through the window. "I'm just trying to get home." "Home? You expect us to believe you've got a home?" The largest of the 3 men stepped forward, cracking his knuckles with theatrical menace. "You've been dodging Hewitt's collectors for 3 weeks. Time to pay what you owe." "I'm not whoever you think I am." Lucy's fingers curled against the window frame. She should stay out of it. This was London, and London's streets were full of debts and the men who collected them. Her brother Thomas had warned her 100 times, "You can't save everyone, Lucy. Your bleeding heart is going to get you hurt." But she'd also seen what happened when no one intervened, when everyone decided someone else's problem wasn't worth the risk. The decision made itself. Lucy grabbed her shawl from the hook by the door, threw it over her shoulders and stepped into the street. The afternoon air hit her, coal smoke and river damp, and the yeasty smell from the baker's 2 shops down. The men hadn't noticed her yet, too focused on their supposed debtor. "Last chance before we make this unpleasant," the lead collector was saying. Lucy's mind raced. She needed something that would make them question their target, something that would buy the stranger enough time to escape. Her gaze caught on the way he held himself despite the fear. There was something almost elegant about it, like an actor playing a part. An idea formed, possibly the worst idea she'd ever had, which was saying something given her history. She closed the distance between them in 6 strides, her boots clicking against the cobblestones. "There you are." 5 heads turned toward her. The stranger's eyes widened. They were brown, she noticed, warm and startled, and completely confused. Up close, he was younger than she'd expected, perhaps early 30s, with dark hair that needed cutting and a jawline that suggested better days and regular meals. "I've been looking everywhere for you," Lucy continued, pitching her voice loud enough for the collectors to hear. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Too late to back out now. "You said you'd be home an hour ago. Your mother's beside herself." The stranger stared at her like she'd sprouted a second head. Lucy didn't give him time to finish. She grabbed his lapels, pulled him forward, and kissed him. For one frozen heartbeat, nothing happened. His lips were warm and utterly still against hers, and Lucy's brain caught up with what her instincts had done. She'd just kissed a complete stranger in the middle of the Strand, in front of witnesses, to save him from debt collectors who might not even have the right man. Then his hand came up to cup the back of her head, gentle and sure, and he kissed her back. It wasn't a chaste kiss. It was the kind of kiss that suggested history, intimacy, the comfortable passion of 2 people who knew each other's mouths. He tasted like peppermint, and his thumb traced a small circle at the base of her skull that sent unexpected heat down her spine. For a moment, a single treacherous moment, Lucy forgot this was a performance. When she pulled back, her face was burning, The stranger's expression had shifted from confusion to something that might have been amusement, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "Sorry I'm late," he said, his voice lower now, intimate. "Got caught up." Lucy forced herself to turn toward the debt collectors, keeping one hand possessively on the stranger's arm. "Is there a problem, gentlemen?" The three men exchanged glances. The leader scratched his jaw, doubt creeping across his features. "Your husband, is it?" "Near enough." Lucy lifted her chin, channeling every ounce of indignant respectability she could muster. "And I'll thank you not to accost him on a public street. He's been at the docks since dawn loading cargo. Whatever you think he's done, you have the wrong man." "The docks?" The second collector frowned. "You were told wrong." Lucy softened her voice slightly, adding a note of weary sympathy. "Happens all the time in this part of town. Too many men in rough coats, all looking half-starved. But this one's mine, and he's coming home for supper before his mother stages a rebellion." The stranger, her supposed almost husband, nodded seriously. She threatened to weaponize the prayer book. Despite everything, one of the collectors cracked a smile. The tension bled from the group like air from a punctured bladder. "Right then," the leader said slowly. "Sorry for the trouble, miss, but if you see anyone matching his description, dark coat with brass buttons, about this tall—" he gestured. "You'll let us know?" "Of course," Lucy lied smoothly. "Always happy to help honest working men." She waited until they'd disappeared around the corner toward Fleet Street before releasing the breath she'd been holding. Her hand was still on the stranger's arm, and she became suddenly acutely aware of the warmth of him, the solid reality of muscle under the threadbare coat. "You can let go now," he said quietly. "Though I have to admit, I'm curious what other rescue tactics you have up your sleeve." Lucy dropped his arm like it had burned her. You're welcome, by the way, for saving you from whatever that was." "Oh, I'm very grateful." He was definitely amused now, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Though I have to ask, do you often accost strange men on the street with passionate kisses, or am I special?" "They were going to hurt you." Lucy crossed her arms, defensive. "You clearly weren't whoever they were looking for, and I couldn't just stand there and watch them break my nose. Be unjustly violent, yes." She realized she was breathing harder than the situation warranted. The adrenaline was catching up with her, making her hands shake. "And it worked, didn't it?" "It worked spectacularly." He tilted his head, studying her with unsettling focus. "You're either very brave or very foolish. I haven't decided which." "Most people go with foolish," Lucy admitted. "Are you actually in debt to this Hewitt person?" "No." The stranger glanced down the street where the collectors had vanished, his expression turning thoughtful. "But I know who they're looking for. Wrong coat, right location. I was careless." "Careless how?" He looked back at her, and for just a moment, something flickered across his face. Calculation, perhaps, or careful consideration. Then the easy smile returned. "I was distracted by a bookshop window. Dangerous habit." Lucy followed his gaze to Winslow and Son. Her bookshop. Well, her brother's bookshop, but close enough. "You read?" "Is that surprise I hear? You think dock workers don't read?" "No, Lucy felt heat creep up her neck. "I didn't mean—" "Relax." He held up a hand, still smiling. "I'm teasing, and yes, I read, when I can get my hands on books that aren't complete rubbish." He nodded toward the shop. "Is that your place?" "My brother's. I help him run it." Lucy hesitated, then added, "He's just become a father. I'm minding the shop while he and his wife sort out nappies and midnight feedings." "Congratulations to him. And to you, for the diplomatic phrasing of sorting out." The stranger straightened his coat, which Lucy now noticed was of better quality than she'd initially thought, just worn and deliberately rumpled. "I should probably leave before your fictional mother-in-law expects me for supper." "Right, yes." Lucy stepped back, suddenly awkward. The kiss was reasserting itself in her memory, which was inconvenient. "Try not to get cornered by any more debt collectors." "I'll do my best." He started to turn away, then paused. "You know, I never got your name. Seems only fair since you compromised my virtue in front of everyone." "I compromised your—" Lucy sputtered. "You kissed me back. In self-defense, you were very aggressive." His eyes were dancing now, warm with humor. "Lucy, wasn't it? I heard it through the window before you staged your rescue." Lucy Winslow. She didn't know why she was giving him her full name, probably the same instinct that had made her kiss him in the first place. "And you are?" There was the briefest hesitation. "James." "Just James?" "For now." He gave a small, almost formal bow, incongruous with his rough clothes. "Thank you, Miss Winslow, for your quick thinking and your questionable judgment. Both were remarkable." Then he was gone, disappearing into the flow of foot traffic with surprising ease. Lucy stood on the street for another moment, watching the space where he'd been, her lips still tingling and her common sense staging a belated protest. She'd just kissed a complete stranger. A man who claimed not to be in debt, but knew who the collectors were looking for. A man who spoke like someone educated, but dressed like someone who worked with his hands. A man who read books and bowed like a gentleman, but had calluses she'd felt when his hand touched her neck. "Lucy Winslow," she said aloud to no one in particular, "you're going to regret this." Ptolemy meowed from the bookshop doorway, orange and judgmental. "Don't start," Lucy told the cat, and retreated inside to the safety of unbalanced ledgers and uncomplicated fictional romances. 3 days passed before James returned. Lucy had almost convinced herself he wouldn't. After all, what reason did a dock worker have to visit a bookshop? The whole encounter had been strange enough that she'd half wondered if she'd imagined it, except her brother's wife Caroline had extracted the full story during a visit that morning, baby Samuel sleeping peacefully in her arms, while she'd interrogated Lucy with the focus of a barrister. "You kissed a strange man," Caroline had repeated, rocking Samuel slightly. "In the middle of the street. To save him from violence." "Lucy." "It worked. That's not the point." But Caroline had been smiling the way she always did when Lucy did something impulsive and foolish. "You're lucky Thomas wasn't here. He'd have worried himself into an early grave." Now, shelving returned poetry volumes in the late afternoon quiet, Lucy found herself glancing at the door more often than necessary, which was ridiculous. James, if that was even his real name, was probably halfway to the docks by now, or whatever place dock workers went when they weren't being mistaken for debtors. The bell above the door chimed. Lucy didn't turn immediately, too focused on wedging Byron between Blake and Coleridge. "Be with you in a moment. Take your time, I'm just browsing." She knocked 3 books off the shelf. James stood in the doorway, afternoon light haloing him from behind. He'd cleaned up, slightly. The coat was the same, but he'd shaved and tied his hair back, making the angles of his face sharper, more defined. He was watching her with barely concealed amusement. "You," Lucy said eloquently, crouching to retrieve the fallen books. "Me," he agreed, crossing to help her. His hands were quick and sure, gathering volumes with the careful touch of someone who respected books. Up close she noticed details she'd missed before. The faint scar above his left eyebrow, the calluses on his palms that seemed wrong somehow, like they'd been acquired deliberately rather than through years of labor. "I was wondering," he said, handing her Paradise Lost, "if you might do me a favor." Lucy straightened, wary. "What kind of favor?" "The learning kind." James glanced around the shop, taking in the floor-to-ceiling shelves, the comfortable reading chair by the window, the slight organized chaos that came from a business run by people who loved books more than profit. "I can read, a bit. Enough to get by. But I'd like to get better, and you seem like someone who knows her way around words." It was a reasonable request. Lucy had taught reading to half a dozen people over the years, shopgirls and apprentices who'd never had proper schooling, older women who'd been denied education in their youth. But something about James's request felt off, like a note played slightly sharp in an otherwise perfect melody. "Why me?" she asked. "Because you kissed me to save my life." His mouth quirked. "Seems only fair. I trust you with my pride." Lucy stopped, regrouped. "Reading lessons aren't charity. I'd have to charge you." "I'd expect nothing less." James pulled a few coins from his pocket, more than she'd have expected a dock worker to carry. "Would this cover a few sessions? An hour here and there when you're not busy?" The coins were real silver, not copper. Lucy's suspicion deepened. "Where did you get this?" "Saved it." The answer came too quickly. "Been setting aside for months." He was lying. Lucy had developed a sense for lies, growing up with an aunt who'd wielded truth like a weapon and fiction like a shield. But she couldn't figure out why someone would lie about having money for reading lessons, or what possible harm could come from teaching someone to read better. Besides, she reasoned, the shop could use the income. And James, whatever else he was, seemed genuinely interested in learning. "Fine," she said, pocketing the coins. "But I have rules. You show up on time, you don't waste my hours. And if you're actually illiterate and just pretending to know the basics, you tell me now." "I can read," James said firmly. "Just not well. Not the way I'd like to." "Right then." Lucy walked to a shelf of simpler volumes, running her fingers along the spines until she found what she wanted. "We'll start with Swift. Gulliver's Travels. It's accessible but not condescending, and if you can manage it, we'll know where you actually stand." James accepted the book, turning it over in his hands with something like reverence. He stopped himself. "Someone read this to me once, long time ago. Well, now you can read it yourself." Lucy gestured to the chair by the window. "Sit. Read me the first page. I need to hear where you stumble." For the next hour, Lucy listened to James read about a surgeon named Gulliver and his ill-fated voyage. He read slowly, carefully, stumbling over words like prodigious and maritime, but not, Lucy noticed, words like tempestuous or diminutive. His mistakes seemed oddly selective, like someone who knew the words but was pretending not to. "You're better than you claimed," Lucy said when he finished the chapter. "Your trouble isn't recognition. It's confidence. Maybe I'm just a naturally quick study." James set the book down, stretching. The movement pulled his shirt tight across his shoulders, and Lucy deliberately looked away. "When should I come back?" "Day after tomorrow. Same time." She hesitated, then added, "And James, whatever you're actually doing at the docks, if you're doing anything at the docks, be careful. Those collectors will be looking for their man, and mistaken identity might not work twice." Something shifted in his expression. "You think I'm lying. I think you're complicated." Lucy met his eyes steadily. "But you're paying for reading lessons, not confession. Your business is your own." "Is it?" James stood, moving closer. He smelled like soap and something else, something faintly expensive that didn't match his clothes. "Because you seem like the type who can't resist inserting yourself into other people's business, heroically, inconveniently, and with very little regard for your own safety. That's not—" "You kissed a stranger to save him from debt collectors," James interrupted gently. "You're teaching reading to someone you suspect is lying to you. You're currently alone in a shop in a part of town where women get robbed regularly, and I notice you don't even lock the door." He tilted his head. "So yes, Miss Winslow, I think you're someone who collects strays and problems with equal enthusiasm." Lucy's cheeks burned. "I'm careful. You're reckless." But he was smiling again, softer this time. "It's going to get you in trouble one of these days." "Ted already has," Lucy muttered. "Regularly." "Then I'll try not to add to the list." James headed for the door, then paused with his hand on the frame. "Thank you. For the lesson, and for not asking questions I couldn't answer." After he left, Lucy stood in the empty shop, staring at the closed door and trying to shake the feeling that she'd just agreed to something far more complicated than reading lessons. Ptolemy jumped onto the counter, knocking over the coins James had left. "I know," Lucy told the cat, "but it's too late now." James returned twice more that week, always in the late afternoon when the shop was quietest. They worked through Swift, then moved to Defoe, then, at James's request, poetry. He claimed to struggle with meter and rhyme, but Lucy noticed he could recite passages from memory after reading them once. "You're a terrible liar," she told him Thursday afternoon, watching him pretend to puzzle over Wordsworth. "You've read this before." "Have I?" James looked up, innocence painted across his face. "Must have forgotten." "Must have." Lucy closed the book, leaning back against the counter. "Why are you really here, James?" For a moment, she thought he might tell her. His expression turned serious, the perpetual humor fading. Then he shook his head. "Would you believe I enjoy the company of a sharp-tongued bookshop assistant who keeps catching you in lies? Especially that." He stood, stretching again, Lucy was beginning to suspect he did it deliberately, testing whether she'd notice. "You're the first person in months who's been honest with me, even when you don't believe a word I'm saying. That's a low bar for friendship. You'd be surprised how rare honesty is." James moved to the window, looking out at the street. "Most people tell you what they think you want to hear, or what benefits them most. But you said I was complicated and charged me for reading lessons anyway. No judgment, no demands for explanations. Just acceptance with a side of suspicion." Lucy joined him at the window. Outside, London was shifting into evening, lamplighters making their rounds, shop owners closing up, the street performers heading to the theatre district where the real money gathered. "My aunt always said I was too blunt for my own good, that no man would want a wife who couldn't learn to hold her tongue. Your aunt sounds delightful. She meant well, in a caustic, soul-crushing sort of way." Lucy watched a carriage roll past, expensive and gleaming. "She raised me after my parents died, taught me to read, taught me to manage a household, taught me that speaking my mind would leave me alone and unmarriageable. 2 out of 3 isn't bad, I suppose." "You're not alone," James pointed out. "You have your brother, his wife, a nephew now. It's not the same." The words came out before Lucy could stop them. "Thomas worries I'll end up bitter like our aunt. Caroline keeps trying to introduce me to suitable young men who work in banking or law. They mean well, but they don't understand that I don't want to be someone's project or problem. I just want—" She trailed off, unsure how to finish. What did she want? Someone who saw her completely and didn't flinch. Someone who laughed at her sharp tongue instead of trying to dull it. Someone who felt like choice rather than compromise. "You want someone who deserves you," James said quietly. "Not someone you have to diminish yourself for." Lucy looked at him sharply. "For someone who supposedly works at the docks, you have very refined ideas about relationships." I read a lot. But the humor was forced this time. Besides, it doesn't take refinement to recognize when someone's been told they're too much their entire life. The moment stretched between them, weighted with things neither of them was saying. Lucy became acutely aware of how close they were standing, how easy it would be to close the distance, to turn this odd friendship into something more dangerous. The shop bell chimed. They both stepped back as an older gentleman entered, looking for a specific botanical text. Lucy served him with automatic efficiency, and by the time he left, James had collected his coat and the book she'd assigned him for weekend reading. "Same time next week?" he asked at the door. "Unless you've mysteriously learned to read perfectly over the next few days. I'll try to remain appropriately illiterate." James hesitated, then added, "Lucy, your aunt was wrong about the tongue-holding and the marriage prospects. You're not too much. You're just waiting for someone who's enough." He left before she could respond. Lucy stood in the empty shop, heart hammering, and admitted to herself what she'd been avoiding for the past week. She was developing feelings for a man she didn't trust, didn't fully understand, and probably shouldn't see again. Ptolemy meowed from his perch on the poetry shelf, orange and accusing. "I'm going to regret this," Lucy told him. The cat, in his infinite feline wisdom, did not disagree. The revelation came on a Tuesday. Lucy was helping Caroline mind the shop while simultaneously managing baby Samuel, who had strong opinions about his godmother's bookkeeping abilities and expressed them through strategic crying whenever she tried to work on the ledgers. "He's doing this on purpose," Lucy muttered, rocking the baby against her shoulder. "He knows I can't balance accounts and soothe simultaneously." "He's 2 weeks old," Caroline said, laughing. "I don't think his evil genius has fully developed yet." She was sorting through returned books, checking for damage. "Speaking of development, how are the reading lessons going?" Lucy had made the mistake of telling Caroline about James. Not everything, just enough to explain why a strange man kept visiting the shop at odd hours. "They're going," Lucy said carefully. "He's a quick learner." "And handsome?" "Caroline." "What?" "I'm simply asking if your mysterious student is aesthetically pleasing for purely observational purposes." "He's—" Lucy searched for a neutral description and failed. "Yes, inconveniently so." "Inconvenient how?" Caroline's eyes sparkled with mischief. "Too handsome? Distractingly handsome? Makes you forget why you're supposed to be teaching him to read handsome?" "All of the above." Lucy adjusted Samuel, who had finally quieted. But it doesn't matter. He's lying about who he is, probably about what he does, and definitely about his reading abilities. I'd have to be mad to develop feelings for someone I can't trust. Or, Caroline suggested, you're already mad about him, which is why you keep teaching him despite knowing he's lying. Lucy opened her mouth to argue, then closed it. Caroline wasn't wrong. Before she could formulate a response, the shop door opened. But it wasn't James. Lady Millicent Ashworth swept in like a silk-clad storm, her lady's maid trailing behind with an expression of long-suffering patience. Lady Millicent was one of their regular customers, wealthy, demanding, and possessed of opinions on literature that could generously be described as confident. "Miss Winslow," Lady Millicent said, not bothering with pleasantries, "I need recommendations. My nephew is hosting a house party next month, and I've been tasked with selecting appropriate reading material, something elevating, intellectual, but not tediously so." Lucy handed Samuel back to Caroline and approached the counter. "What subjects interest your nephew's guests?" "Oh, the usual. Politics, philosophy, society gossip thinly disguised as social commentary." Lady Millicent waved a dismissive hand. "He's invited half of London's eligible bachelors and all of the acceptable ladies. It's basically a marriage market with better wine." "How romantic." "Isn't it?" Lady Millicent missed Lucy's sarcasm entirely. "Though I suppose some young people still believe in love matches. My nephew included, unfortunately. He's being terribly stubborn about the whole thing." "How dare he?" Lucy murmured, pulling books from the philosophy section. "Quite right. His mother, my sister, is beside herself. He could have anyone, any title, any fortune, but he keeps insisting on genuine connection." Lady Millicent pronounced the words like they were a disease, as if connection pays estate debts or maintains social standing. Lucy was formulating a diplomatic response when Lady Millicent continued, oblivious. "Still, I suppose it could be worse. He could be like poor Ravenscroft, the Duke of Ravenscroft, you understand, skulking around London in disguise because he doesn't trust anyone to be honest with him. Can you imagine? A duke, pretending to be common, just to meet people who don't immediately start calculating his net worth." Lucy's hands went still on the bookshelf. "Though I suppose I understand the impulse," Lady Millicent said, examining her gloves. "Everyone who approaches a duke wants something. Money, influence, introduction to other wealthy fools. Must be exhausting, never knowing if people like you or your title." "The Duke of Ravenscroft," Lucy repeated carefully. "Is he often in disguise?" "Oh, who knows? The man's been impossible since his engagement ended. That was 2 years ago now. His betrothed decided she preferred an earl with better hunting lands. Broke his heart or his pride or whatever dukes have instead of human emotions." Lady Millicent finally focused on Lucy. "Why do you ask? You haven't encountered any mysterious gentleman in common clothes, have you?" "No," Lucy lied, her mind racing. "Just curious." But she wasn't curious. She was connecting pieces with horrifying clarity. James's educated speech, the selective reading struggles, the expensive soap smell and the calluses that seemed deliberate. The way he'd said, "Someone read this to me once about Gulliver's Travels," then stopped himself. His mother read it to him. Because noble mothers did things like that for their sons. James was the Duke of Ravenscroft, the man she'd kissed in the street, taught to read, and was developing completely inappropriate feelings for was possibly the most eligible bachelor in England. And he'd lied to her about everything. "Miss Winslow?" Lady Millicent was staring at her. "You've gone quite pale. Are you feeling unwell?" "Fine," Lucy managed. "Just tired. New baby in the family, you know. Sleepless nights." She got Lady Millicent out of the shop with an armful of books and a promise to send more recommendations. The moment the door closed, Caroline crossed to her, Samuel still sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Lucy, what's wrong?" "I'm an idiot," Lucy said flatly. "A complete, comprehensive idiot." She told Caroline everything. The kiss, the reading lessons, the lies she'd noticed but ignored. Caroline listened with widening eyes, occasionally glancing down at Samuel as if checking that motherhood hadn't somehow impaired her hearing. "Let me make sure I understand," Caroline said slowly when Lucy finished. "You've been teaching the Duke of Ravenscroft to read, except he can already read, and you kissed him, in public, to save him from debt collectors." Yes, and you're developing feelings for him. Apparently, but he doesn't know that you know who he really is. Not unless he's significantly better at reading people than he is at pretending to read books, Lucy said bitterly. Caroline sat down, carefully adjusting Samuel. What are you going to do? I don't know. Lucy paced the shop floor, her mind churning. Confront him? Pretend I don't know? Stop the lessons entirely and avoid the humiliation of finding out why a duke would spend weeks lying to a bookshop assistant? Maybe he has good reasons. What possible good reason could justify lying about your entire identity? The same reason he's in disguise in the first place, Caroline suggested gently. He wants to know if people will like him when they can't profit from knowing him. And you did, Lucy. You liked him without knowing his title or his fortune. That's probably the most honest interaction he's had in years. That doesn't make the lying acceptable. No, Caroline agreed, but it makes it understandable. She stood, passing Samuel to Lucy, despite her protests. Here, hold your nephew and think about what you actually want. Not what your pride demands, or what your wounded feelings insist upon. What do you want? Lucy looked down at Samuel's sleeping face, impossibly small and peaceful. I want him to have trusted me with the truth. Then tell him so. Just like that? Just like that? Caroline squeezed Lucy's shoulder. You've never been one to hold your tongue, Lucy Winslow. Don't start now because a duke made you feel something. James arrived that evening for his scheduled lesson, and Lucy was ready. She'd sent Caroline home, fed Ptolemy, locked the back door, and positioned herself behind the counter like a general preparing for battle. When James walked in, smiling, windswept, carrying the book she'd assigned him, she felt her careful composure crack slightly. Evening, he said, setting the book down. I finished Wordsworth. You were right about the meter. You're the Duke of Ravenscroft. The words landed between them like a dropped glass, sharp and irreversible. James went very still, his expression carefully neutral. How long have you known? He asked quietly. Since this afternoon. Lady Millicent came in. Lucy folded her arms, hating how much her hands wanted to shake. She was very informative about London's most eligible bachelor, who disguises himself as a commoner to find honest interactions. Sound familiar? James's jaw tightened. Lucy, were you ever going to tell me? She kept her voice level through sheer force of will. Or was this just entertainment for you? See how long the bookshop girl could be fooled? It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? Lucy demanded. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like I spent weeks teaching a man to read who could probably recite poetry better than I can. It looks like I shared things about myself, honest, vulnerable things, while you lied about everything. Not everything. James moved toward her, then stopped when she stepped back. My name is James. James Thornfield. And yes, I'm the Duke of Ravenscroft, and yes, I lied about who I was. But I never lied about what I wanted. Which was? To know you. The real you, not the version who'd perform for a title. His voice was rough, frustrated. Do you have any idea how rare that is? How exhausting it is to watch people calculate their words, their expressions, their entire personalities based on what they think a duke wants to hear. So you thought lying was better. I thought honesty was worth waiting for. James pulled off his cap, running a hand through his hair. I came here by accident that first day. I was investigating why my estate funds weren't reaching the people they were meant for, and I needed to move unnoticed. Then those collectors cornered me, and you— He laughed, helpless. You kissed me. Without knowing anything except that I might need help. No calculation, no agenda. Just impulse and strange kindness. I saved a stranger, Lucy said quietly. Not a duke. Exactly. James met her eyes, pleading now. You saved a stranger. You taught reading to someone you thought was a dock worker. You argued with me, challenged me, rolled your eyes at my terrible lies. And every moment of it was real, Lucy. Every conversation we had, every comfortable silence, that was real. But you weren't. She hated the crack in her voice. The man I was getting to know doesn't exist. He does exist. He's standing right here. Terrified he's lost you over something he should have confessed weeks ago. James took a careful step closer. I was wrong not to tell you. I know that. but I kept putting it off because every day with you felt like the first honest thing I'd had in years, and I didn't want it to end. It's ending now. Is it? Another step. Because you're still here. You're furious, and you have every right to be, but you're still here. Lucy wanted to deny it, to storm out and leave him standing in her brother's bookshop, alone with his titles and his lies. But Caroline was right. She'd never been good at holding her tongue, even when it would be easier. I don't know how to trust you now, she admitted. You lied about everything. Your work, your education, your entire life. How am I supposed to believe anything else you say? Test me. The words came out urgent, desperate. Ask me anything. I'll answer honestly, even if it costs me. Fine. Lucy lifted her chin. Why were you really in this neighborhood that day? My steward's been embezzling. Funds meant for workers' housing, food subsidies, medical care. He's been skimming for months, maybe years. I came to see the evidence myself, to understand who was suffering while I signed papers in ignorance. James's mouth twisted bitterly. Those collectors were looking for one of his victims, a man who'd been forced into debt because the money I'd allocated for his family's care never arrived. That explained the guilt she'd seen flash across his face. And the reading lessons? An excuse to keep seeing you. He didn't hesitate. I can read perfectly well, but watching you light up while explaining meter and metaphor, I would have pretended to be illiterate for months just to keep having those afternoons. That's pathetic. Yes. James smiled slightly. Welcome to what you do to me, Lucy Winslow. You make me pathetic and desperate and willing to lie to keep something real. Lucy pressed her hands against the counter, needing the solid wood to anchor her. What happens now? You've been caught. Game over. Do you go back to your proper life and forget this entire episode? Is that what you want? I asked first. What I want, James said slowly, is to keep knowing you. Not as a project or a disguise or a temporary rebellion against my proper life. I want to keep having conversations where you challenge me, where you look at me like you can see straight through whatever mask I'm wearing, where I can be someone more than a title and a fortune. That's not fair, Lucy said, hearing the weakness in her own voice. You can't ask me to separate James the dock worker from James the Duke. They're the same person. Are they? He moved closer, cautious. Because the dock worker could be honest with you, could sit in your shop and debate poetry without wondering if you were agreeing because you meant it or because you wanted something. That's who I want to keep being with you, not a duke courting a bookshop assistant. Just two people who started with a scandalous street kiss and somehow became friends. We can't just be friends now, Lucy protested. You're you, and I'm me. There are rules about this. Society's rules. Reality's rules. Then we'll write new ones. James was close enough now that she could see the hope and fear warring in his expression. Lucy, I'm not asking you to accept what I did. I'm asking you to let me prove I can do better, that the trust I broke can be rebuilt. Why? The question came out smaller than she'd intended. Why does it matter so much? You could find honest conversation anywhere. There are plenty of women who'd perform exactly the way they think a duke wants, James interrupted. Who'd be charming and agreeable and completely artificial. You're the first person in years who's told me when I'm being an idiot. Who's treated me like I'm capable of being wrong. Do you know how valuable that is? Lucy did know. She'd spent her whole life being told she was too honest, too sharp, too unwilling to soften her edges. And here was someone claiming those edges were exactly what he wanted. It was everything she'd been told to never hope for. If I give you another chance, and I'm not saying I am, there are conditions, Lucy said. No more lies. About anything. I don't care if the truth is uncomfortable or embarrassing or inconvenient. You don't get to decide what I can handle. Agreed. And you have to fix whatever your steward broke. The people suffering because of him, they need more than exposure. They need actual help. Already working on it, James said. I've filed formal complaints, started audits of the last 5 years of estate finances. It'll take months to sort out, but everyone who was cheated will be compensated. Good. Lucy took a shaky breath. And James, if you break my trust again, if you lie or manipulate or hide things because you think it's protective or kind, I'm done. No second chances after this. Clear? Clear. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. and took her hand. His palm was warm, steady. "Thank you. I haven't forgiven you yet," Lucy warned, but she didn't pull away. "I'm just willing to see if you can earn it back." "I'll take it." James squeezed her hand gently, then released it. "Should I go, give you time to think?" "Yes," said Lucy's common sense. "Send him away before you do something stupid like kiss him again." "Stay," said Lucy's traitorous heart. "Finish the lesson. You owe me an honest discussion of Wordsworth after weeks of pretending to struggle with it." James's smile was brilliant, relieved. "I thought Tinton Abbey was overwrought and self-indulgent. The nature worship felt performative." "Finally," Lucy said, "an opinion I can respect." They spent the next hour arguing about romantic poetry, and for the first time Lucy was fairly certain they were both being honest. It was a start. Over the next 3 weeks, James rebuilt Lucy's trust through a combination of relentless honesty and strategic vulnerability. He told her about his broken engagement, how his former betrothed had chosen an earl with better hunting grounds. He explained his mother's expectations, how she viewed marriage as dynastic duty rather than partnership. He showed her the ledgers documenting his steward's theft, pointing out entries that made him sick with shame at his own negligence. In return, Lucy told him about her parents' deaths, the carriage accident that had left her and Thomas orphaned at 14 and 16. She described her aunt's caustic household, the constant reminders that Lucy's sharp tongue would doom her to loneliness. She admitted her fear that she'd spend her life watching other people build families, while she remained the spinster aunt who read too much and said too little to be marriageable. "That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard," James said after one such confession. They were sitting in the shop after hours, sharing terrible tea and stale biscuits. "You don't say too little. You say exactly what needs saying. The problem isn't your tongue, it's everyone else's ears." "Poetic," Lucy observed. "Wrong, but poetic. I'm serious." James set down his teacup. "Lucy, you made me examine my entire understanding of what honesty requires. Before I met you, I thought protecting people meant shielding them from uncomfortable truths. But you've shown me that real respect means trusting someone to handle reality. That's not a character flaw. It's a gift that leaves me mostly alone. You're not alone now." The words hung between them, weighted with implications neither was quite ready to name. They'd been circling something for weeks now, something that felt like friendship, but kept threatening to tip into something more dangerous. Lucy broke the moment by standing, collecting teacups. "Your mother will expect you home." "My mother expects me to marry someone appropriate, produce heirs, and stop embarrassing her by investigating embezzlement in common clothes." James stood, helping her tidy. "I'm already a disappointment. Might as well add stays out late with bookshop assistants to the list." "I'm not your rebellion." "You're not my anything," James agreed, "which is exactly why I keep coming back." The shift happened on a rainy Thursday. James had been helping Lucy reorganize the shop's poetry section, a task that had devolved into heated debate about whether Byron deserved his reputation or was simply a talented narcissist with good publicity. "He was brilliant," Lucy argued, shelving Don Juan. "Troubled, yes, self-destructive, absolutely, but brilliant. He was a performer who happened to write poetry between scandals." James handed her the next volume. "If he'd lived in our era, he'd be in the papers weekly for affairs and duels. Is that different from dukes who disguise themselves to investigate financial crimes?" "That's completely different." "How?" "Byron enjoyed the attention. I'm trying to avoid it." James grinned at her. "Though I admit the disguise has had unexpected benefits." They were close together in the narrow aisle between shelves, close enough that Lucy could smell the rain on his coat. She'd learned his tells over these weeks, the way his left eyebrow quirked when he was about to make a terrible joke, the slight pause before he said something vulnerably honest, the particular stillness he adopted when he was carefully not commenting on something. He was employing that stillness now, looking at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What?" Lucy asked. "Nothing. James, I'm trying to decide if I'm reading this situation correctly," he admitted. "And if I am, whether acting on it would be taking advantage of your willingness to give me another chance." Lucy's breath caught. "What situation?" "The one where I've been in love with you since approximately the second week of pretending you needed to teach me to read," James said quietly, "and where I think, But I'm not certain. You might feel something similar, though you're much better at hiding it than I am." Her heart was trying to escape her chest. "You're in love with me, desperately, inconveniently, against all common sense and social expectations." James didn't move closer, giving her space. "But I understand if that's not something you want to hear right now, or ever. I broke your trust and I'm still rebuilding it, and maybe this is too much too soon." Lucy kissed him. It wasn't like the first kiss. That had been performance, desperation, strategy. This was intention, choice, her hands in his hair, his arms coming around her waist, the poetry books forgotten as they remembered how well they fit together. The kiss ended slowly, reluctantly. James kept her close, his forehead pressed to hers as their breathing steadied. "So I was reading the situation correctly," he murmured. "Don't be smug. I'll try." He was smiling against her mouth. "But you make it difficult." They kissed again, slower this time, learning each other without the pressure of public performance. James was gentle and thorough, his hands respectful, even as they mapped her shoulders, her spine, the curve of her waist. Lucy let herself believe, just for this moment, that this could work, that a duke and a bookshop assistant could somehow navigate the impossible space between their worlds. Then the shop door opened. They sprang apart like guilty teenagers. Caroline stood in the doorway, holding Samuel and wearing an expression of theatrical innocence. "Don't mind me," she said, "just returning a book, a task that apparently requires witnesses." "Caroline," Lucy said, mortified. "This isn't—" "It's exactly what it looks like," James said firmly. He'd moved slightly in front of Lucy, protective, instinctive. "I'm courting your sister-in-law, with her permission." Caroline's eyebrows shot up. "Are you?" "He is," Lucy confirmed, stepping around James, "though we'd appreciate discretion." "Of course." Caroline's smile was knowing. "Though I should mention that Thomas will want to meet him properly, and possibly threaten him. It's brotherly tradition." "I'll prepare my defense," James said solemnly. "Should I lead with my title or my intentions?" "Your intentions," both women said simultaneously. After Caroline left, Lucy and James stood in the shop's sudden quiet, the reality of their situation settling like dust. "She's right," Lucy said. "Thomas will want to meet you, and once he knows who you actually are—" "He'll worry I'm toying with you," James finished. "I know, and he'd be right to worry. But Lucy, I need you to understand something." He took her hands, serious now. "This isn't an experiment for me. It's not a rebellion or a scandal I'm courting. You are the first real thing I've had in years, and I'm not giving that up just because society says it's complicated." "It's more than complicated," Lucy protested. "Your mother will be furious. Society will gossip. Your friends will question your judgment, and I—" She stopped, swallowing hard. "I don't know how to be what a duchess is supposed to be." "Then don't be." James squeezed her hands. "Be exactly who you are, sharp and honest and occasionally reckless. That's what I fell in love with, not some imaginary version who's learned to curtsy properly and bite her tongue at balls. That's easy for you to say. You're not the one who'll be scrutinized." "You're right," James acknowledged. "I have the protection of my title. You don't. Which is why I need to know if this is what you actually want, or if I'm pressuring you into something that will only hurt you in the end." Lucy looked at their joined hands, thinking about her aunt's warnings and Caroline's hopes and her own careful dreams of what partnership might look like. "I want this," she said finally. "You, us, whatever complicated mess it becomes. But James, if I do this, if we do this, I need you to promise me something. Anything. Don't try to protect me from the consequences." Lucy met his eyes steadily. "Don't shield me from gossip or your mother's disapproval or society's judgment. I need to face it honestly, or I'll always wonder if I could have handled it. If you really believe I'm strong enough for this, then trust me to be strong enough." James studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "No shielding. But I reserve the right to stand beside you while you handle it. That's acceptable." They sealed the agreement with another kiss, and Lucy tried not to think about all the ways this could unravel. Thomas's meeting with James was exactly as uncomfortable as Lucy had anticipated. Her brother had insisted on closing the shop early, sending Caroline and Samuel home, and conducting what he called a proper interview. James had arrived in his actual clothes, well-tailored coat, polished boots, everything that marked him as exactly what he was, and submitted to Thomas's interrogation with remarkable patience. "So you're a duke," Thomas said, arms crossed. "And you've been courting my sister by pretending to be a dock worker." "Initially, yes," James admitted. "Though in my defense, she saved my life before I had a chance to introduce myself properly. By kissing you in the street. That part was her idea." Thomas glared at Lucy, who shrugged unapologetically. They were going to break his nose. "And now he's breaking your heart." "I'm not," James started. "Not yet," Thomas interrupted. "But you will, because that's what happens when dukes play at being common. And then remember they have duties, expectations, families who won't accept a bookshop assistant as their future duchess." "Thomas," Lucy said sharply, but James held up a hand. "He's not wrong to worry. And you're not wrong about the expectations, Mr. Winslow. My mother will be furious. Society will gossip. There will be people who view Lucy as opportunistic or inappropriate or a dozen other unkind things." He leaned forward, serious. "But here's what I need you to understand. I don't want someone who fits society's expectations. I want someone who challenges me to be better than comfortable, someone who sees past the title to the person underneath. And your sister is the only person I've met in years who does that." "Pretty words," Thomas said. "But what happens when the gossip starts, when your friends cut her, when your mother makes her life miserable?" "Then I'll make it clear where I stand," James said simply. "Publicly, repeatedly, and without ambiguity. Lucy won't face this alone." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, studying James with the same assessing look he'd given Lucy when she'd first confessed her feelings. Finally, he sighed. "You hurt her, Your Grace, and title or no title, I'll make you regret it. Fair enough. And if society makes this impossible, if the cost becomes too high, then it's Lucy's choice," James finished. "Not mine, not yours, not society's. Hers. And whatever she decides, I'll respect it." Thomas looked at Lucy. "Is this really what you want?" "Yes," Lucy said without hesitation. "It's terrifying and probably foolish and definitely complicated. But yes." Her brother nodded slowly. "Then I suppose I'm meeting the Duke of Ravenscroft properly this time." He extended his hand. "Thomas Winslow, and if you make my sister happy, Your Grace, you're welcome in this family." James shook his hand, relief evident. "Just James, please. The title's exhausting enough without using it with family." After Thomas left, Lucy and James stood in the empty shop, the weight of what they'd just committed to settling around them. "That went better than expected," James said. "He threatened you, that's better. He threatened me because he loves you. I'd be more concerned if he hadn't." James pulled her close, tucking her against his chest. "Though I should probably tell you, my mother is significantly more formidable than your brother. You're not encouraging me. I'm preparing you." He pressed a kiss to her hair. "She's hosting a charity gala next week. I'd like you to come. As my guest." Lucy pulled back to look at him. "You want to take me to a society event? In front of your mother?" "I want to stop hiding what we are," James corrected. "And yes, that means introducing you to my world. The parts of it that matter, anyway." "James, I don't know how to navigate those events. I'll embarrass you." "You couldn't embarrass me if you tried." He cupped her face gently. "Lucy, you're brilliant and sharp and more honest than anyone in that ballroom will be. If anything, I'm worried you'll be disappointed by how shallow it all is. What if they're cruel to me? Then I'll make it clear they've insulted the woman I intend to marry." The words came out easily, naturally, like he'd been planning them for weeks. Lucy's breath caught. "You intend to marry me?" "Eventually," James smiled. "When you're ready. When we've built enough trust that you believe I mean it. But yes, Lucy, that's the direction this is heading, if you'll have me." It was too much, too fast, too overwhelming. But it was also exactly what she'd stopped letting herself hope for. "Ask me after I survive meeting your mother," Lucy said. "Deal." The gala was 3 circles of social torture condensed into one ballroom. Lucy had borrowed a dress from Caroline, sage green silk that had been a gift from a wealthy patron and never worn, and spent an hour letting Caroline arrange her hair into something approximating fashionable. She'd practiced small talk and polite smiles, and how to hold a champagne glass without looking like she wanted to use it as a weapon. None of it prepared her for walking into the Ravenscroft ballroom on James's arm. The room went quiet. Not completely, but enough that Lucy felt the weight of every turned head, every assessing gaze. She'd known intellectually that James's courtship would attract attention, but knowing and experiencing were vastly different things. "Breathe," James murmured, his hand steady at the small of her back. "You look beautiful. They're just curious. They're judging. Let them." He guided her through the crowd with practiced ease, nodding to acquaintances, but not stopping. "You're not here for their approval." But she was, in a way, because these people were James's world, his friends, his peers, his mother's allies. Their disapproval would make his life infinitely more complicated. They were halfway across the ballroom when a woman detached from a nearby conversation group. She was elegant, silver-haired, and wearing an expression that could have frozen the Thames. "Mother," James said evenly, "may I introduce Miss Lucy Winslow?" "Lucy, my mother, the Dowager Duchess of Ravenscroft." The Dowager's gaze raked over Lucy like she was livestock at market. "Miss Winslow, how unexpected." It wasn't a compliment. "Your Grace." Lucy curtsied, grateful for Caroline's hasty lessons that morning. "Thank you for allowing me to attend." "I wasn't aware I'd extended an invitation." The Dowager's smile was sharp. "But my son has always been impulsive. Picking up strays seems to be his latest hobby." "Mother," James's voice carried warning. "What?" "I'm simply observing that you've brought a shopkeeper, is it? To a charity gala for London's most prominent families. It's quite the statement." Lucy felt heat crawl up her neck. Around them, conversations had quieted again. People were watching, waiting to see how this would play out. "Miss Winslow is a bookseller," James said, his hand tightening protectively on Lucy's back. "And she's my guest, which means she's entitled to the same respect as anyone else here. Respect must be earned, darling, not simply declared." The Dowager turned her attention back to Lucy. "Tell me, Miss Winslow, what exactly do you and my son have in common, beyond his charitable impulse to educate the lower classes?" This was it. The moment Lucy had been dreading. She could feel the room's attention like physical pressure, could sense the gossip already forming. The smart thing would be to deflect, to laugh it off, to be small and unthreatening, but Lucy had never been particularly good at being small. "We have honesty in common," Lucy said clearly, "and respect for people's actual character rather than their inherited titles, which I realize might be a foreign concept in these circles, but it's surprisingly refreshing once you try it." The Dowager's expression went glacial. "How dare you?" "She dares because I asked her to," James interrupted. "Because unlike most people in this room, Lucy doesn't perform for anyone. She's exactly who she appears to be, which is apparently threatening to people who've spent their lives maintaining elaborate pretenses." "James Thornfield, you will not speak to me that way. I'll speak to you however I need to protect someone who matters to me." James's voice carried across the now silent ballroom. "Lucy is my guest. She's here because I invited her. And if that makes you uncomfortable, Mother, then perhaps you should examine why honesty bothers you so much." The Dowager drew herself up, furious and humiliated. "You're making a spectacle. Over a shop girl. Your father would be ashamed." "My father," James said quietly, "would have liked her, because she reminds me that titles don't excuse cruelty, and power doesn't justify treating people as lesser." He took Lucy's hand, lacing their fingers together in full view of everyone watching. "Now, if you'll excuse us, I believe we were promised dancing." He led her away, leaving his mother standing in the center of a circle of shocked aristocrats. Lucy's heart was pounding so hard she could barely hear the orchestra starting up. "James, I shouldn't have said that. You should have." He pulled her onto the dance floor, positioning them for a waltz. "You were magnificent. Terrifying, but magnificent. I just made an enemy of your mother. You were already her enemy the moment I brought you here." James's hand settled at her waist as the music began. "At least now she knows you won't be pushed around quietly." They danced, and Lucy tried not to notice how many people were staring. James was a good dancer, confident, assured, making her feel graceful despite her limited practice. But the whispers were building, rippling through the ballroom like wind through wheat. "They're talking about us," Lucy murmured. "Let them." James spun her gently, his eyes never leaving hers. "Lucy, do you trust me?" "That's a complicated question right now." "Fair enough, then trust this. I knew what bringing you here would cost. I knew my mother would be cruel. I knew society would gossip, and I brought you anyway because I wanted them to see what I already know, that you're worth more than every person in this room combined." "That's excessive." "It's true." The waltz ended, but James didn't release her. "And I need you to know that whatever happens next, whatever gossip spreads, whatever my mother tries, I'm not backing down. You're not a scandal I'm courting or a rebellion I'm staging. You're the person I want beside me, and I'm going to keep choosing you until you believe it." Lucy opened her mouth to respond, but a commotion near the entrance cut her off. Guests were turning, craning to see what was happening. James's expression shifted to confusion, then concern. "Stay here," he said, already moving toward the disturbance. But Lucy was already following, pushing through the crowd until she could see what everyone was looking at. A man stood in the ballroom entrance, middle-aged, well-dressed, but with the desperate air of someone who'd run out of options. He was holding papers, waving them at anyone who would look. "Embezzlement!" he was shouting. "The Duke of Ravenscroft's steward has been stealing from estate funds for years. I have proof, documented proof." James had gone very still. "That's Hewitt," he said quietly. "The man who employed those debt collectors, the one whose victims were being squeezed because my funds never reached them." The man Hewitt spotted James and pointed dramatically. "There. Your Grace, this steward of yours has ruined dozens of families, including mine. My business failed because the contracts we'd signed with your estate were never honored. The money you'd promised never came." The ballroom had descended into chaos. People were talking over each other, demanding explanations, looking between James and Hewitt with naked curiosity. Lucy watched James's face as he processed this very public accusation. She could see him calculating, trying to figure out the best way to handle this without making things worse. Then his gaze found hers across the crowd, and she saw him make a decision. "You're right," James said, his voice cutting through the noise. "My steward was embezzling. I discovered it 3 months ago, began a formal investigation, and filed criminal complaints. He's currently in custody awaiting trial." The room went quiet again. "Everything you're owed will be repaid," James continued, addressing Hewitt directly. "With interest and compensation for the damage caused, I take full responsibility for not catching this sooner, for trusting the wrong person and allowing good people to suffer because of my negligence." "Words," Hewitt spat. "That's all you aristocrats have, words and promises and—" "Miss Winslow," James interrupted, looking at Lucy. "Would you come here, please?" Lucy's confusion must have shown, but she moved forward anyway, joining James in the center of what was rapidly becoming a very public disaster. "This is Lucy Winslow," James told the room. "She works at a bookshop in the neighborhood most affected by my steward's crimes. She's seen firsthand what his theft cost real families, and she's the one who taught me that accountability means more than signing checks from a distance." He took her hand, turning back to Hewitt. "I can't undo what happened, but I can promise you that every person hurt by this will be compensated, and that I'll personally oversee the estate operations to ensure it never happens again. Miss Winslow has agreed to help me establish proper oversight, local representatives who can report problems directly rather than going through intermediaries who might be corrupt." Lucy stared at him. They had discussed no such thing. But James's eyes were pleading with her to trust him, to go along with this very public declaration of their partnership. And Lucy realized what he was doing. He wasn't just defending her to his mother. He was making her essential, giving her purpose and position that society couldn't easily dismiss. "That's right," Lucy heard herself say. "We've been working together to identify affected families and ensure proper restitution." It wasn't entirely a lie. They had talked about the embezzlement, about James's guilt over not catching it sooner. But this was something else entirely. Hewitt looked between them, suspicion and desperate hope warring on his face. "You'll put that in writing." "I'll do better," James said. "I'll make it a matter of public record. Every compensation paid, every reform implemented. You'll have transparency and accountability." The ballroom was utterly silent now. Lucy could feel the dowager's fury like radiation, could sense the gossip already forming. But James's hand was steady in hers, and when he looked at her, there was nothing but gratitude and something that might have been awe. "Thank you," he said quietly, "just for her, for trusting me." The rest of the gala was a blur of whispered conversations and pointed looks. James spent an hour with Hewitt, going over specifics, making concrete promises with Lucy acting as witness. By the time they left, Lucy's head was spinning with implications. "You made me part of your estate reforms," she said, as James's carriage carried them back toward her brother's shop. "In front of everyone. I gave you a role that matters." James sat across from her, proper and careful in the enclosed space. "One that society can't easily dismiss as inappropriate. You're not just my courtship interest anymore. You're essential to fixing something that matters." "You should have asked me first." "Would you have said yes?" Lucy considered. "Probably not. I would have worried about overstepping." "Exactly." James leaned forward. "Lucy, I need you to understand something. Tonight wasn't just about defending you to my mother, though I'd do that regardless. It was about giving you position, power, a reason for being in my world that doesn't rely solely on my affection. That's manipulative. It's strategic." He smiled slightly. "And it's true. You do understand the neighborhood better than I do. You would be invaluable in making sure reforms actually help people, instead of just making me feel better about my guilt. So now I'm your estate consultant. If you'll accept the position." James's expression turned serious. "I'm offering you partnership, Lucy. Not just romantic partnership, though I want that too, but actual functional partnership in work that matters. Work that gives you independence and purpose beyond being the Duke's interest." Lucy looked out the carriage window, watching London roll past. She thought about her aunt's warnings, about being too bold and too sharp for marriage, about how she'd always expected to end up alone because she refused to be smaller. And here was James offering her exactly the opposite, asking her to be bigger, bolder, more visible, making her sharpness an asset rather than a flaw. "Your mother is going to make this very difficult," Lucy said. "Yes. Society will gossip. Constantly. People will say I'm using you for position. Let them." James reached across the carriage, taking her hand. "Lucy, I'm not asking you to make this easy. I'm asking if you're willing to make it possible." The carriage stopped in front of the shop. Lucy should get out, retreat to safety, think carefully about what she was agreeing to. Instead, she kissed him. It was brief, fierce, full of decision. When she pulled back, James was staring at her with something like wonder. "Is that a yes?" "It's a let's find out," Lucy said. "I'll help with your reforms. I'll attend your society events. I'll face your mother's disapproval and society's gossip. But James, if this becomes impossible, if the cost becomes too high, then we reassess," James finished. "Together. But Lucy, I don't think you understand how unlikely impossible is, because you're the strongest person I know. And if anyone can survive my world without losing themselves, it's you." Lucy climbed out of the carriage, then turned back. "Thank you. For tonight. For defending me. For making me part of something that matters. Thank you for letting me." James smiled. "I'll see you tomorrow. We have reforms to plan." "Tomorrow," Lucy agreed. She watched the carriage disappear into London's evening traffic, then let herself into the shop. Ptolemy was waiting, orange and expectant. "I think I'm in love with a duke," Lucy told the cat, "which is either the best or worst decision I've ever made." Ptolemy, in his infinite wisdom, simply demanded dinner. The next 6 weeks were simultaneously the best and worst of Lucy's life. Best because James was constant, visiting the shop daily, including her in meetings with his estate managers, genuinely implementing the reforms they'd discussed. He was patient with her learning curve, respectful of her boundaries, and absolutely unwavering when society proved cruel. Which was often. Worst because society gossip was even more vicious than Lucy had anticipated. She became the shop girl seducing her way to a title in drawing rooms across London. Lady Millicent, who'd been so chatty about the Duke of Ravenscroft, suddenly found reasons to avoid Winslow and Son. Other customers followed. Thomas had to weather-pointed questions at his club about his sister's situation. The Dowager Duchess made her feelings abundantly clear by refusing to receive Lucy at the family's London house. She sent carefully worded letters to James, reminding him of his duties, his position, the importance of appropriate matches. When letters failed, she visited in person, staging increasingly uncomfortable confrontations. Lucy was present for one such visit. They were in James's study, going over compensation schedules for Hewitt and 3 other affected families, when the Dowager swept in without knocking. "James, this has gone on long enough," she announced, ignoring Lucy entirely. "You've made your point. You've demonstrated your independence. Now it's time to end this ridiculous association and consider appropriate—" "Mother." James didn't look up from the ledger. "I'm working. You're playing at reform with a shopkeeper." The Dowager finally acknowledged Lucy's presence with a withering glance. "Miss Winslow, surely you understand this is temporary. My son has obligations, a position to maintain. He cannot seriously intend to—" "He's standing right here," James interrupted, setting down his pen. "And he can speak for himself. So let me be absolutely clear. Lucy is not temporary. She's not a phase or a rebellion or a scandal I'm courting. She's the person I intend to marry. And if you can't respect that, then you're welcome to absent yourself from my life until you can." The Dowager went pale, then red. "You would choose her over your own mother." "I'm choosing honesty over manipulation," James corrected. "Which, coincidentally, is what Lucy taught me, that people deserve to be valued for who they are, not what they can provide or how well they perform." "This is absurd. She's a nobody." "She's Lucy Winslow," James said quietly. "She's brilliant and kind and braver than you've ever been. She saved my life, taught me to see beyond my privilege, and somehow tolerates my family, despite having every reason to run. So yes, Mother, I'm choosing her, every time, without hesitation." The Dowager stared at her son like he'd grown a second head. Then, with magnificent dignity, she turned and swept from the room. The silence she left behind was deafening. "That was dramatic," Lucy said finally. "She's dramatic." James rubbed his face tiredly. "I'm sorry, I know this is harder than I promised." "Stop apologizing." Lucy moved around the desk, taking his hands. "James, I knew this wouldn't be easy. And yes, your mother is formidable, and society is cruel, and I'm losing customers because half of London thinks I'm a social climber. But you—" She squeezed his hands. "You keep showing up. You keep defending me. You keep making me part of something that matters. That's worth more than easy." "Is it?" James pulled her closer, resting his forehead against hers. "Because I keep watching you weather cruelty that's only happening because of me, and I keep wondering if I'm being selfish. If I should let you go before this destroys you." "You can't let me go," Lucy said firmly. "Because I'm not yours to release. I'm choosing this, James. Choosing you. Even when it's hard. Maybe especially when it's hard." "Lucy, I love you," she interrupted. "I've been trying not to say it because it feels too big, too fast, too overwhelming. But I do. I love you. And I'm not leaving just because your mother disapproves or society gossips, or this is complicated." James kissed her then, deep and grateful and slightly desperate. They stayed like that for a long moment, holding each other in the quiet of his study, while London carried on outside. "I love you too," James said against her mouth, in case that wasn't abundantly clear. "It was fairly obvious," Lucy admitted, "but hearing it doesn't hurt." They returned to work on the compensation schedules, but something had shifted. The declaration hung between them now, acknowledged, reciprocated, impossible to take back. Lucy tried not to think about how many people would be furious when they found out. The crisis came on a cold November afternoon. Lucy was at the shop alone. Thomas and Caroline had taken Samuel to visit Caroline's parents, when 3 women entered. They were clearly society ladies, dressed in expensive walking costumes and wearing expressions of calculated malice. "Miss Winslow," the leader said, examining her gloves with theatrical disinterest, "we've heard so much about you." Warning bells clanged in Lucy's mind. "How can I help you?" We're organizing a charity auction, books for underprivileged children. We thought, given your expertise, you might contribute some volumes. Pro bono, of course. The woman's smile was sharp. Unless you're too busy with other pursuits. The subtext was clear. They were testing whether Lucy would trade on her connection to James for special treatment. I'd be happy to contribute, Lucy said evenly. What age range are you targeting? For the next 30 minutes, the women asked increasingly pointed questions about the shop's finances, about Lucy's family, about her friendship with the Duke of Ravenscroft. They probed for weakness, for evidence of social climbing, for any crack they could exploit. Lucy answered with careful honesty, refusing to be baited. Finally, when they'd exhausted their questions, the leader delivered her real message. You know, Miss Winslow, society can be very forgiving to those who know their place. A shopkeeper who minds her business is respectable, even admirable. She paused delicately. But a shopkeeper who reaches beyond her station, that's something else entirely. And the Duke of Ravenscroft's mother is a very influential woman. It would be a shame if your family's business suffered because you couldn't recognize when you'd overstepped. The threat was barely veiled. Are you suggesting, Lucy said slowly, that I should end my relationship with James to protect my brother's shop? I'm suggesting you consider what's best for everyone involved, including yourself. The woman gathered her gloves. The shopkeeper can live a perfectly fulfilling life without aspiring to duchesses. Think about it, Miss Winslow, before you lose more than customers. They left in a rustle of silk and thinly veiled contempt. Lucy stood in the empty shop, hands shaking, trying to process what had just happened. It was one thing to face gossip and disapproval. It was another, entirely, to have someone threaten her family's livelihood because she loved the wrong man. She was still standing there, paralyzed by implication, when James arrived for their afternoon meeting. He took one look at her face and crossed the shop in 3 strides. What happened? Lucy told him. Everything. The women, the questions, the barely veiled threat against Thomas's business. James's expression went from concern to furious. Who were they? I don't know. I didn't ask their names. Lucy wrapped her arms around herself. James, they weren't wrong. Thomas is already losing customers because of me. If your mother decides to make this a formal campaign, she won't. You can't know that. Yes, I can. James pulled her into his arms, fierce and protective. Because I'm going to make it clear that threatening you means threatening me. And my mother might disapprove of our relationship, but she won't risk the family's reputation by publicly feuding with me. You're underestimating her. You're underestimating me. James pulled back to look at her. Lucy, I told you I wasn't backing down. I meant it. If my mother wants to weaponize society against you, then I'll make it clear that means losing me entirely. No family dinners, no social obligations, no access to her only son. She'll fold. And if she doesn't, then she doesn't. James cupped her face gently. Lucy, you're asking me to choose between my mother's approval and the woman I love. That's not actually a choice. It's the easiest decision I've ever made. Your entire life is in that world. Your friends, your position. My life is wherever you are, James interrupted. Everything else is just context. Lucy wanted to believe him, but she could see the strain this was causing. The way he deflected questions from friends, the careful distance he'd created from his mother, the weight of choosing between worlds. Maybe I should step back, she heard herself say. Not end this, just make myself less visible. Stop attending events, focus on the reforms from behind the scenes, take the pressure off. No, James's voice was firm. Lucy, that's exactly what they want. For you to diminish yourself, to hide, to make their comfort more important than your presence. And I will not ask you to do that. I will not let you do that. Then what do we do? James was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then his expression shifted, decisive, slightly reckless, entirely certain. We get married. Lucy stared at him. What? We get married, James repeated. Soon, publicly, before my mother can organize more threats or society can manufacture more objections. We make it an accomplished fact instead of a courtship they can sabotage. James, that's insane. Is it? He was warming to the idea now, his hands moving to her shoulders. "Lucy, we love each other. We want to be together. The only thing stopping us is other people's approval, which we're never going to get anyway, so why are we waiting? Because marriage is permanent. Because if we do this and it fails, it won't fail." James's certainty was absolute. "Lucy, I've never been more sure of anything. You are what I want. Not someday, not eventually. Now. And if getting married means my mother can't threaten your family, and society has to accept you because you're a duchess instead of a courtship scandal, then that's what we should do." Lucy's mind was spinning. "This is too fast. We've only known each other a few months. Do you love me?" "Yes, but do you want to marry me eventually?" "Yes." "Then what are we waiting for?" James pulled her closer. "I'm not saying we have to do this tomorrow. Take time to think. Talk to Thomas. But Lucy, I'm asking, will you marry me? Not because society pressures us, not because it's strategic, but because I love you and I want to wake up next to you for the rest of my life." It was the worst proposal in the history of proposals, impulsive, reactionary, born from frustration rather than romance. But it was also achingly honest, entirely James, and exactly what Lucy needed to hear. "Ask me properly," she said, "not in panic after a threat. Ask me like you mean it." James dropped to one knee right there in the shop, taking her hand in both of his. "Lucy Winslow," he said, looking up at her with unguarded love, "you saved my life with an impulse kiss, and somehow convinced me that honesty was more valuable than comfort. You've made me better, braver, and significantly more willing to argue with my mother. You're sharp and kind and occasionally reckless, and I love every impossible thing about you." He squeezed her hand. "Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that you're worth every social complication and family drama? That you're worth everything?" Lucy looked down at him. This duke who'd disguised himself to find honesty, who'd defended her to his mother, who was currently proposing in a bookshop with dust motes dancing around him like the world's least romantic confetti. "Yes," she said, "but I have conditions." "Name them." "We tell Thomas first, together, and if he has concerns, we address them honestly." "Agreed. And we keep working on the estate reforms. I don't want to be a duchess who just hosts parties and manages social calendars. I want to do work that matters." "You'll be the most overqualified duchess in England," James said, smiling now. "What else? And if your mother makes my life unbearable, you have to let me fight my own battles. No shielding, no protecting, just standing beside me." "Deal." James stood, pulling her into his arms. "Anything else? Kiss me before I remember all the reasons this is terrifying and change my mind." He kissed her thoroughly, right there in the shop where they'd first met properly, surrounded by books and dust and the faint smell of Ptolemy's disapproval. When they broke apart, Lucy was smiling despite herself. "We're going to create such a scandal," she said. "Good," James replied. "I'm tired of respectable." Thomas took the news better than expected, possibly because Caroline had been predicting this development for weeks. They had dinner at Thomas and Caroline's home, with baby Samuel providing comic relief whenever the conversation got too serious. "You're certain about this?" Thomas asked Lucy while James was helping Caroline in the kitchen. "Marriage is permanent, Lou, and his world. It's not going to get easier just because you have a title." "I know." Lucy held Samuel, finding comfort in his warm weight. "But Thomas, I've spent my whole life being told I'm too much, too sharp, too honest, too unwilling to soften my edges. And James, he doesn't want me to be different. He wants me to be exactly this. How could I not choose that?" Thomas studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Then you have my blessing. Both of you." "But Lucy," he leaned forward, "the moment it stops being worth it, the moment he asks you to be smaller than you are, you come home. Clear? Clear. And your grace?" Thomas called toward the kitchen. "If you hurt my sister, Duke or not, I will find a way to make you regret it." James appeared in the doorway, smiling. "I'd expect nothing less." They made the announcement the following week at another of the Dowager's events. James had insisted, wanting to make it as public and irreversible as possible. Lucy wore a dress Caroline had insisted on buying for her, dove grey silk that made her feel like she was playing dress-up in someone else's life. "You look beautiful," James murmured as they entered the ballroom. I looked terrified. That too. He squeezed her hand. Ready? Lucy nodded, and they walked to the center of the ballroom where the dowager was holding court. The older woman saw them coming, and her expression shifted from polite interest to wary hostility. Mother, James said, his voice carrying in the sudden quiet, I have an announcement. James, this is neither the time nor place. Miss Lucy Winslow has done me the honor of agreeing to marry me. James kept his eyes on his mother, unwavering. We'll be married by special license within the month. You're welcome to attend, but your approval is not required. The ballroom erupted in whispers. The dowager went white, then red, her hands clenching at her sides. You cannot be serious. I'm completely serious. James turned to address the room. Miss Winslow is remarkable. She's brilliant, compassionate, and has a better understanding of true nobility than most people born to titles. I'm honored that she's chosen to join me in life, and I expect my friends, he gave the word particular emphasis, to treat my future Duchess with the respect she deserves. It was a command wrapped in pleasantry, and everyone in the room understood it. Either accept Lucy as James's wife, or lose access to one of England's most eligible dukes. The dowager made one last attempt. James, please. Think about what you're doing. The scandal is already happening, James finished, so we might as well give them something worth talking about. He looked at Lucy and his expression softened. Besides, I'm tired of waiting for permission to be happy. He kissed Lucy right there, in front of his mother and half of London society. It was brief but unmistakable, a public claiming, a line drawn in marble ballroom floors. When they broke apart, the room was chaos. Some people were scandalized, some were delighted by the drama, and a few, a small but significant few, were smiling with what looked like genuine approval. Lady Millicent materialized beside them, eyes sparkling with gossip hunger. Well, she said, this will certainly be the wedding of the season, or the scandal of the decade. Possibly both. We're hoping for both, Lucy said, finding her voice. Seems wasteful to aim for just one. Lady Millicent laughed, surprised and genuine. Oh, I think you'll do quite well as a duchess, Miss Winslow. You have spine. Heaven knows we need more of that in society. It wasn't a ringing endorsement, but it was something, and as more people approached, some offering congratulations, others barely concealing their curiosity, Lucy began to believe that James might be right, that they could do this. The dowager left early, and Lucy tried not to feel guilty about the older woman's humiliation, but James was right. His mother had brought this on herself by trying to threaten and manipulate rather than accept. That night, after the gala, James walked Lucy home through London's quiet streets. You know she's not going to give up, Lucy said. Your mother. She'll keep trying to separate us. Let her try. James pulled Lucy closer as they walked. She'll learn what I already know, that you're immovable once you've made a decision. I'm not immovable, I'm just stubborn. Stubbornly perfect, James corrected, pressing a kiss to her temple. My stubbornly perfect future wife. Lucy leaned into him, letting herself believe it. That this was real. That they were getting married despite every obstacle and objection. That sometimes the boldest thing was believing you deserved to be chosen. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For seeing me. All of me, even the parts I tried to hide. Lucy stopped walking, turning to face him in the empty street. For making me believe that being too much was actually being exactly enough. James cupped her face gently. Lucy, you were never too much. Everyone else was just too little to appreciate you. They kissed under the lamplight, and for once, Lucy didn't think about gossip or scandal or disapproving dowagers. She just thought about James and the future they were building and how lucky she was to have saved a stranger on a random Tuesday afternoon. The wedding was small, deliberately so. James wanted to avoid the circus that a full society wedding would become, and Lucy was perfectly happy with intimate over spectacular. They were married in a small church near the shop, with Thomas and Caroline as witnesses, baby Samuel providing musical accompaniment through intermittent crying. The dowager did not attend, which was a relief to everyone involved, but what mattered was standing before the altar, holding James's hands and promising to choose each other every day. Promising to stay honest, stay brave, stay impossibly, complicatedly committed. I, James Thornfield, take you, Lucy Winslow, to be my wife. James's voice was steady, sure. To honor your truth, even when it's uncomfortable. To stand beside you, not in front of you. To love you exactly as you are, not who I might wish you to be. I, Lucy Winslow, take you, James Thornfield, to be my husband. Lucy's hands trembled slightly in his. To call you on your nonsense. To challenge you to be better. To love you not despite your complications, but because of who you are beneath them. They were imperfect vows, too honest, too specific, too much themselves, but they were real. When the vicar pronounced them married, James kissed her like he'd been waiting his whole life for permission. The wedding breakfast was at Thomas and Caroline's home, simple and warm and exactly right. No society guests, no performance, just family and the few friends who'd proven themselves trustworthy. To the Duke and Duchess of Ravenscroft, Thomas said, raising his glass, may they continue to horrify proper society and inspire the rest of us. Everyone drank to that. Later, when the celebration had ended and night had fallen, James and Lucy stood in the bedroom of his London house, her house now too, though the thought was still strange. How do you feel? James asked, helping her with the endless buttons on her wedding dress. Married. Lucy smiled at him over her shoulder. Terrified, happy, all of it simultaneously. Good. He finished the last button, his hands warm against her spine. Because I'd hate for you to be bored already. Lucy turned in his arms, looking up at this man she'd married. This Duke who'd lied to her, defended her, loved her loud enough for all of London to hear. I love you, she said, even though you're going to be impossible to live with. I love you too. James kissed her softly. Even though you're going to spend our entire marriage telling me I'm wrong about things. Someone has to. It might as well be my wife. They had a lifetime ahead of them, full of arguments and reforms and probably ongoing tension with the Dowager. But they also had honesty and choice and the kind of love that only came from seeing someone completely and staying anyway. Lucy Winslow, now Lucy Thornfield, Duchess of Ravenscroft, thought that was worth any scandal society could manufacture. Epilogue 6 months later, Lucy stood in the refurbished community centre in the neighbourhood where she'd first kissed James. They'd converted an old warehouse into a space for education, healthcare access and public meetings, one of dozens of reforms they'd implemented across the estate. It's perfect, James said, standing beside her as local families filtered in for the opening celebration. You were right about the reading room and the medical consultation space. Of course I was right. Lucy smiled at a young mother who'd been one of the first to benefit from the new programs. I usually am, modest as ever. Someone has to balance your ego. James laughed, pulling her close. They'd found their rhythm over these months, working together on reforms, navigating society events as a united front, slowly, gradually earning respect from people who mattered. The Dowager still didn't speak to them, but even her disapproval had lost its sting, because Lucy had learned something important. She didn't need the Dowager's approval. She didn't need society's acceptance. She had James and Thomas and Caroline, and work that mattered, and the certain knowledge that she was exactly enough. Do you ever regret it? James asked quietly. Marrying me, taking on all of this. Lucy looked around at the community centre, at families who now had resources they'd lacked before, at children who could access education, at the tangible good they were doing together. Never, she said firmly. Though I still think you should have led with I'm a duke instead of I work at the docks. Where's the romance in that? Where's the honesty in lying? You have a point. James pressed a kiss to her temple. I'll try to remember that in our next life. Please don't make me save you from debt collectors in our next life, Lucy said. Once was enough. But you were so good at it. They bickered all the way through the opening ceremony, and Lucy wouldn't have changed a single word. Because this, arguments and all, was what love looked like when you stopped pretending to be smaller than you were. When you found someone brave enough to let you be impossibly, complicatedly yourself. Lucy Thornfield, the bookshop assistant who'd become a duchess, thought that was worth everything. And somewhere in London, in a shop called Winslow & Son, Ptolemy knocked over another stack of books and meowed his agreement. The end. Thank you so much for staying with Lucy and James's story until the very end. Sometimes the boldest thing we can do is believe we're worthy of being chosen, not despite who we are, but because of it. If you enjoyed their journey from that impulsive kiss to a love built on honesty and choice, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had to choose between fitting in and staying true to yourself? Until our next story, remember, the right person won't ask you to be smaller. They'll stand beside you and celebrate exactly how much space you take up in the world.